So, good morning, everyone. My name's John Till, founding director of Thinking Place, and welcome to this webinar, Creating a Confident and Collaborative Place, Recovery and Reset After Coronavirus. I'm pleased that there's an amazing attendance, so many of you, which is great that you're interested in this. So we're just going to take a minute to let everyone in from the lobby. I've already lapsed into Zoom speak, I do apologise. So just a few seconds, we'll let everybody in and then we'll start. Okay, can you virtually put your hands up so that we can see that you're there and also that you can actually hear me? That would be really cool. And that's great. So I think we can make a start. So we are delighted to be delivering this event with the Institute of Economic Development, and I think it's really important that we set an initial context for the discussion and for the content. And I'm delighted that we've got the Executive Director of the IED to do that. So I'd like to introduce Nigel Wilcock. Nigel, over to you.
Thanks, John. The Institute of Economic Development supports all economic development professionals. We're a membership body. I'd encourage anybody that doesn't know us to look us up and obviously be delighted to speak to anybody that's got an interest. But in terms of this webinar, very pleased to have been invited, very pleased to support the event. We know that even before COVID-19, there were some towns and cities of the UK that were having a pretty tough time, particularly those towns and cities that had lost some of the traditional or original focus or reason for being. We know that that was the case, and we were beginning to do some work to put that right through a variety of organisations. But COVID-19 is obviously disproportionately hitting towns, the hospitality, leisure, retail, tourism industries. We know that. That's hitting people in informal work, it's hitting the poor, it's hitting younger people, it's hitting the lower skilled, it's hitting the female workforce, it's hitting all of these people in a disproportionate way. It's a major problem. But as a result of this, I think newfound freedoms from digital work, an increased focus on well-being, maybe more interest in getting back into interesting places, independent offers, smaller centres, all of these things could mean that towns and cities have a chance to be reborn as a result of this. Obviously, that won't come without innovation. It won't come without new ideas. It won't come without hard work. But I think there is a chance. There is a chance for a reset and to allow some places to come back again. That's why we were very happy to support this. That's why we were delighted to have this opportunity to sit alongside one of our corporate members, Thinking Place, in thinking about this work, and it's why today I'm very interested to listen to what's about to happen. So thank you very much, John, and look forward to hearing the rest of the event.
Right, thank you, Nigel. So I think you've nailed the importance of this, and having a look at the participants. I'd like to say hello to some old friends. It's a shame I can't really see you, and to welcome some new ones. For those who don't know, Thinking Place is place specialist working across the UK, and for the last 14 years, we've been working with all sorts of places to help them reimagine what they're going to be for, to widen place leadership, and to create active collaboration. The very things that places are actually telling us at the moment they're looking to do in response to this crisis. So I think the subject matter has seemed to really strike a chord. I think the interest, the attendance today reflects that. And across the hour, I think, you know, we need to look at some quite important aspects of this as we emerge from lockdown. You know, going forward, what is the balance going to be between recovery and reset? How bold will and should places be in how they think about their economic future? So we might be virtual today, but we do want to be interactive. So please tweet as we go along using the handle, our handle at thinking_place. It'd be great to see your thoughts and views. Importantly, you can ask questions throughout. So using the Q&A facility, just to say, with the number of people we've got and the level of interest, I'm sure we're not going to be able to answer everybody's questions, but we'll do our level best to do some of them. The chat facility is not being used today, so please keep away from that one. So in terms of the format, we're going to hear from all four speakers first. I know, because I know them, they're going to be insightful, they're going to be provocative. We have had the pleasure with working with all of them. And then we're going to move into a discussion, a Q&A session. But don't wait till then to post your question. Come up with your question and put it on the Q&A. We are recording this today, and the session will be made available to you afterwards. So I think it's time to get going now, and we're going to start in Hampshire with David Fletcher. David is the Assistant Director of Economic Development at the County Council. Hampshire, a real economic powerhouse, many hidden gems. David, we're looking forward to your perspective on this, and everyone please get ready to ask questions as David goes through his session. Thank
you. I'm hoping that, is that working, John? Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, John, and thank you for arranging this opportunity to discuss and debate these key issues with peers across the economic development and place leadership arena. Yeah, Hampshire's an interesting place. I'm not from Hampshire. I'm from the north originally, but a fascinating place in terms of the scale of the economy. I think my latest stat is we are the largest economy in England not to have a combined authority. So that's not necessarily my pitch to be first in the queue for one, but you never know. But going back to the current crisis, I think my key points really start with the urgency of the crisis and its impact, as in a way forced us to look at very short-term measures. Obviously, the government's thrown a lot at business support. The latest sort of stage of that support is moving into town centres, and the government's acted swiftly, which is really, really good. But inevitably, it's been more of a shotgun basis. There's not been a lot of targeting or prioritisation within that approach. And I think John said he wanted us to be provocative, or was predicting we would be. Just tripping for a second into the kind of political dimension. There's no doubt that the political agenda adds to that pressure of not only having to do something, but having to be seen to be doing something. But I think place leaders have a different responsibility. I think, as well as the immediate, I think we have to look beyond the immediate and determine what elements of our previous long-term strategies are still relevant. So I don't think you throw everything out. We also, I think, need to focus on that, you know, making sure we're going to have sound, resilient economies going forward. And it will still be those companies and sectors which are innovative, adaptable, tradable, which will underpin prosperity in the future. I don't believe those principles will change radically. But what the place leaders need to do to make sure we've still got that environment to support those elements of the economy that we need for future prosperity? Well, we'll still need talented people, whether they're homegrown or attracted into our places. We'll still need really good quality homes for people. We'll still need attractive natural environments. We'll still need vibrant urban centres. We'll still keep talking about digital connectivity, maybe even more so in the future. And we will still need access to international markets. We can't just rely on the domestic market to sustain our economy. And in Hampshire, actually place leadership is probably more important than ever, because we need to have a clear voice. Even the south of the country needs to have some asks of government and needs support from government. And obviously we still have a major job to do to convince the private sector that this is the place to invest. So actually, when we've started on a journey working with John and his team, which is we're still at a relatively early stage, but actually that's suddenly become even more relevant than it probably was before. So I'm going to stop there, John, because I know we want to let the other speakers speak, and then we'll get into the interactive discussion, which I look forward to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Yeah, and I think plenty of food for thought there, and it is important that I guess in this crisis situation where there's a lot of reaction going on, we also do have to think ahead, and some people have got to be thinking about the bigger picture, I think, as you mentioned. So we're going to move along the south coast now. It's amazing what you can do virtually. So we're going to the port of Newhaven on the edge of South Downs National Park with its ferry service to Dieppe, and we're going to hear from Corrine Day. Corrine is the Programme Director of the Enterprise Zone there. And so everybody post your questions as we go along. Corrine, over to you for your view.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. I'll start by introducing myself as an eternal optimist. I'm Corrine Day, Programme Director of Newhaven Enterprise Zone, and optimism certainly has been required. Just give you a little quick overview. Newhaven's a small industrial harbour town in East Sussex. We're on the edge of the South Downs National Park. We're just to the east, 9 miles from Brighton, and with a substantial potential to grow. We are unusual that we've got the direct ferry service to Dieppe, and we're very industrial in nature, yet we have a very rural and affluent wider environment. We have excellent transport routes, innovative businesses and offshore renewables, marine engineering, but we have this significant physical capacity to grow, and we really are a great value location. However, the town centre has been in considerable decline in recent years, and we do need to be looking at repurposing. The community's been promised a great deal that hasn't been delivered, and the image of Newhaven regionally and nationally is either that of a struggling coastal town or non-existent, hence my introduction to where we are. In 2017, the Enterprise Zone was established, and that really was for a mechanism to drive local growth. We're part of the Greater Brighton City deal. We've been invited to bid for future high street funding and the town's fund, and if we're successful for those, it really will be transformational for the town. So whilst we face many challenges as a town, it really is once in a generation opportunity to repurpose itself as a thriving industrial town, a centre of green energy and creative community. So I wanted to just say where we are now. We have, with Thinking Place, gone through a significant process of place-based engagement. We've listened really carefully to the stakeholders of Newhaven, and there are a number of things that have really mattered. The key thing for us is changing the narrative from dump to diamond, and that's where it comes into today's talk about creating a confidence and optimism in its future. We've developed a shared view of the place, what it could be for, and reassuringly, this was overwhelmingly consistent and not a surprise. So then came COVID at that point. Materially, we're hopeful that COVID hasn't really altered the state of play for Newhaven. We're such a declining port town that we were already feeling that we were at our lowest ebb. but arguably things will be harder post-COVID. My feeling is that it's created a change in headspace. People in all walks of life have had to adjust to a pace of change not known in our lifetimes, and are perhaps becoming more open. Maybe we recognise, even if unwillingly, that more change is going to follow. So I really believe, as an optimist, that it's a good time to be doing things differently. COVID and the shock thereafter provides us, I think, with an opportunity to press a reset for Newhaven and surrounding area. We've done all of this work, and we now intend to launch the new narrative, images and branding, which have played a part in these last 12 months, and use this to get our place proposition out there. Observing the behaviour during COVID, but in particular in Newhaven, it's really underlined to me that these assets and unique character of the town, what's valued in Newhaven, are the very things that we heard so strongly in the recent engagement, both that the assets could be better enhanced and utilised, but also what's missing. The shared view of what can be done, I think, during COVID has been really underlined and is made more pressing than ever. My view in Newhaven, and more widely as well, because it'll be the same, is that to ignore it now would be more damaging than COVID in the recovery and the reset of Newhaven and its future. So what's next? What's coming over the next few months? I think Newhaven is in a critical moment, not just after COVID, but pre-COVID. Its ambition around repurposing and transformation speaks to the current language of policymakers and therefore funding, but also to the overheated economy of the Greater Brighton region. The affordability of space and opportunity for growth is exciting, and with a place-based offer now set out, there should be no holding us back. But of course, it's never that straightforward. So today's question was, what matters most in a place's recovery and reset? We've rehearsed countless times over the year the significant investment required in infrastructure. We have a pipeline of development emerging, but the key issue for a town like Newhaven has been to set out this clear proposition for something better, a shared plan for the place. Not simply what we can attract in our current form, but to show ambition in how we'll get there. My answer to the question is we've worked really hard as a place to create this shared view of the future. But what use is this if procrastination then prevails by us as decision makers and those stakeholders? We need to start with clear signals in this current context of doing things differently. We need to begin to warm up our muscles of saying yes. The pipeline is important, but so too are the messages we send out to early adopters, to investors, that we are a place that gets things done. I believe this will help us enormously in creating confidence and demonstrating that our places are places of collaboration, and therefore where enterprising people can thrive. I'm not just talking about money, of course that helps, but I mean if we wish to create spaces for creative collaboration, for industry and enterprise, for well-being, then the town halls need to follow through on the promise of doing what it takes to recover and thrive. We need to begin by saying yes, not with reasons why not. We need to use our assets where possible to enable that narrative to be realised. We need to enable others to do the same, other landowners as well as local authorities. And that comes back to point one. We need to match policy with the story. Our contradiction by not doing so undermines that confidence. We need to know our places, show up, answer as best as we can. Even when the answer is not known yet, I think we need to say so. More practically, keys to derelict buildings, flexible peppercorn leases, access to public spaces, permission to create temporary treatment of public spaces. The list could go on. We all know what they are, and there are many examples. So in summary, for me, I think places now more than ever cannot afford to prevaricate. Innovation, as we know, happens in times of hardship and threat. Recovery can lead to places thriving if we seize the opportunities, if we work collaboratively and not just with the usual suspects. My cautious, optimistic self worries that again, I will be disappointed and that ship, or ferry in our case, will have sailed along with its boatloads of passengers in Newhaven's case. That's all from me.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Corrine. I mean, yeah, doing things differently, highlighting local assets, avoiding prevarication and decision making. There should be some interesting points to think about in the discussion. So thank you for that. And now we move north to Wakefield, to Tom Stannard. Tom is the Corporate Director of Regeneration and Economic Growth at the council there. It's going to be interesting, I guess, to see whether geography has an impact as to what's important in terms of a place perspective. So keep your questions coming in and we'll try and get to those later. In the meantime, Tom, your thoughts, please.
Great, thank you very much, John. Delighted to be here today, and I'm more enthused than I was at the outset, really, having heard Corrine's optimism in particular, which is fantastic. John set us the heroic task of being both provocative and quick this morning, though, so I'll do my best to hit both of those spots if I can be. I won't wax lyrical about what's brilliant and fantastic about the north of England or about Wakefield. I'll just refer you to the excellent work we've done with Thinking Place that articulates that story brilliantly, really, for a key city in the heart of the Northern Powerhouse region. So do have a look at that if you get the chance. I think the challenge here, though, is really the topic of today's session, which is about creating confidence and collaboration. And undoubtedly, whichever way you cut this, looking at the economics or looking at the health impacts, with 300,000 plus cases and 40,000 deaths across the UK, potentially up to 50,000 if you count suspected cases, confidence has taken a big hit and collaboration has been disrupted in this. You've only got to walk down the street and see people crossing the road to avoid you to see the practical implications of that collaboration being very, very disrupted by what have now rapidly become kind of new and necessary social routines, all of which permeate throughout the real economy. And I think it's the real economy that we've got to focus on in this whole question about reset and recovery on the back of this. I won't go into great detail about the economics, but I think it's just to say, I think from my point of view, there are some indicators in all of this that we all need to keep track on and we all need to watch and worry about, I would suggest, as well as coronavirus cases and infection rates, consumer activity across the board. Is that coming back in retail? Is it coming back in the housing market? Look at inflation. We're close to deflation now. We should all be worried about that and the long-term ramifications of that, and look at business activity. In the real economy, though, crucial to keep focused on the labour market. Unemployment, but also hidden unemployment. What happens at the cliff edge at the end of the furlough? And what happens about that persistent underemployment, the low-skill, low-wage economy that we have to support to get back on track to help the real economy to function properly when we get out the other side of this crisis. Of all of the kind of vanilla analyses that I've seen of, you know, how many kind of endless lists of all these areas of intervention we're all being brave about focusing on and so on over the course of the recovery, I'll just pick off 4, I think, John, that I think are important for us to keep in mind in this. One is the housing market. Yes, it's about new build. Yes, it's about construction sector, retrofit, climate change and so on. But it's also about the social sector, it's about the private rented sector, and it's about people's real experience of keeping the housing market functioning. It's a barometer for the extent to which recovery is coming back on track, but crucial for us to intervene and support that to function effectively to get recovery started. The second, skills and employment. And my plea with this, which is a plea I've been making on the stump whenever I can for more than a decade now, is yes, let's look at youth. Yes, let's look at the impact on young people, but let's not forget an all ages progression strategy with this. When the real economy starts ticking again, helping people to progress in their careers, helping people coming off furlough to reskill. Adults in the real economy are just as important as young people in this, if not more so, and we've got to focus more strongly on that. The third, very important for us in Wakefield, is business restart, and that's partly about new sectors, but it's also about the real economy and getting low pay, low skill sectors restarted again. Without that backbone, the economy just won't happen and won't move, and it's progressing people from those sectors, from the old to the new, that's going to be key to that restart. And finally, leisure and tourism. In Wakefield, in West Yorkshire, we've got 2 of the biggest attractions in the north of England, international global attractions, Hepworth Gallery, the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, pre-coronavirus, billing hundreds of thousands of visitors per year. All of that is frozen, the supply chains that sit around it. And those attractions are key to place definition, to place recovery, and to getting that economy back on track. And I think not forgetting the kind of complex web of supply chain that supports those attractions is critical to recovery. My final thought really was about devolution and localism, and I'll just finish on this if I can. I do wonder aloud really whether this is going to be part of the new normal for us. I hate the phrase new normal. I hear it far too often. It's getting more and more contrived as the days go on really. But I think devolution and what that really means in practice, which is much, much more than just my combined authority, our 1.8 billion devolution deal, everything that's happening in GM and the West Midlands and so on and so forth. But it's what does devolution and localism really mean for us in the new future we're facing. I think this is about powers coming down to localities. It's about the growing public regard for public servants and public services. It's about Thursday evening on your doorstep for real people across Wakefield, across West Yorkshire. It's about the newfound regard, I think, for community activism and everything we've got out of our voluntary sectors. And it's about that local private sector leadership, which is key to building back collaboration and building back that place reset. And if we dare to dream as well, I think perhaps it's finally the real opportunity that we're looking at for that kind of golden nirvana we've been talking about for years, which is real health and social care integration and making a good fist of that finally. And if government backs us on that as well as on devolution deals, I think we've got a real chance to reset and get that collaborative place leadership back in reality as part of our economic recovery. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I mean, plenty of challenges in there, but I think yeah, optimism, hope, and I think we have to hold on to that as we look forward in terms of the opportunity to do things differently, because it cannot and will not be just business as usual. And so last but not least, we're going to have a view from the Midlands now, from the Chief Executive of Coventry City Council, Martin Reeves. Coventry, a city that has changed hugely and positively in the last 10 years. Of course, there are still challenges, but it's made massive strides. Martin, we're interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Thanks, John. Good to see everyone, or at least hear from them. I'll be brief. I'm an economist, I'm a devolutionist, I'm a localist, I'm a proud and passionate local public servant, and I'm an evangelist for systems and place leadership. And, you know, it's not about our credentials, but I was an evangelist for places leading very differently through people and their systems a long time before it became popular. So I think I've got some credibility for that. But the reason for mentioning those is, before I just give you a sense of where I think we might want to think about coming out of reset and recovery from COVID, is the context of those characteristics for me, having spent 12 weeks of my professional and personal life on Gold Command for Coventry, Gold Command for the region of the West Midlands, now leading on Test Track and Trace Pilot, and being close to central government on its Cobra right the way through, has made me realise that all of those characteristics, my evangelism, my pride of local places, and my determination that we do get more power devolved and a greater respect for our local places and our leadership and our assets, is now more determined in my mind than ever before. And much of what you and all would have seen with regards to trying to manage through what is, without any doubt at all, a unique crisis that has not followed the same pitch and yaw of anything in the past, and will not show the same cadence of reset and recovery of anything we've seen before. Let's just get real. It is very, very different. Has been delivered in my view, and the reset and recovery will be delivered in this context through amazing local people and local leadership, full stop. And often and continually, and I say it how it is, despite and not because of coherent policy and delivery from our central government. It's been despite it in many ways, and will continue to be so, and I'm sure we'll get into Q&A. So that's a context, John and colleagues. I think that's really, really important. But because I'm an evangelist for all of this, and been thinking a lot about not just my own city and my own region, but colleagues on this call up and down the country, I'll just share 4 very quick things, and then we'll get into a discussion. First is, because of this, my view is we need emblems and symbols for our places more than ever before. Because if you think about what happens, and you know, Tom's already talked about the human cost of the loss, the excess deaths, the fear still that exists within our communities, but added also to the fact that any of us that have been close to this knew right from the start that any pandemic, any nasty disease like this, far from it not being discriminatory, the opposite is true. It is discriminatory, and our very inequalities for our places and our challenges have become broader and deeper as a result of this, and will continue to be a bigger challenge going forward. So therefore, all of us know psychologically and for our communities, we need stakes in the ground, which are amazing emblems and symbols of hope, but also a beacon, if you like, for where we're going in the future. You'll all have your own. I've seen the list, brilliant number of people on this call. You'll have your own, and I'll come back to that finally, but you need to understand them, and they need to flash greater than ever before, in my view, in our places. So emblems and symbols, number one. Number two, and I've been banging on about this for years, and Thinking Place and ourselves have worked on this in the past. All of our places, again, on this call, have assets. The challenge is many of them are either hidden and not really known to us, or perhaps more importantly, are not connected. Here is a perfect opportunity for us to dig deep for those, if you like, rough diamonds that are hidden, polish them up, but actually connect them all together so much better. So number one, emblems and symbols of real national, maybe even international hope for our places, locally rooted. Number two, really understand our assets because they're there, dig them up, and actually connect them so much better than ever before. Number three, and this is absolutely critical, we've got to find a way through this crisis into a recalibration, reset, and recovery for a confident but authentic and realistic narrative about what our futures and what our places are going to look like and feel like. And do that in a way which is absolutely cognizant of the fact that everything from international money markets to structures to institutions to the way in which we live our lives have been changed forever, and arguably the opportunities for a different story going forward are really positive and powerful, but they've got to be rooted in reality. And I would ask and urge everyone, and John has heard me say so many times, that in that economic narrative going forward has to be a sense of what authentically and legitimately our places have. We are so bloody special. Wakefield is so different to Coventry, is so different to those places in the South Coast and places elsewhere in our home nations. So don't try and force something which is not part of our narrative. Watch what happens now if people aren't careful about everyone's going to become a green futured, technological, digitally centered place. That is unrealistic. That is unauthentic. So go to where your strengths are and have a story that's confident. And finally, and again, this has already been mentioned, we've got to reboot, reset. I'm not interested in recovery. Recovery suggests going back to where we were. We reset by unleashing the unusual, often unsuspected assets in our places. So if we do these four things, we've got a chance of actually, in my view, making the most of what have been the most horrendous crisis for this country and this world, but rebooting a very different future. And it's really possible that we can do that in a confident, realistic way. Thanks, John.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. So we now move on to the questions, the discussion, which I know that you'll all be keen to get involved with, and we've got some fantastic questions coming through. So I'll pose these. I'm not going to worry about necessarily where they've come from, and we'll see what the panelists have got to say. The first is kind of a reflection of balance here, and whether there is a risk of a very visible local focus on town centres, which is completely understandable in the economy, as opposed to supporting and working with some of the real big players, the large employers that lots of places have around us. I wondered if you've got a thought on that, David, if I start with you.
Yes, thank you, John. Yeah, as I probably touched on in my intro, I think there's a real need to maintain a good proportion of our focus on beyond the immediate crisis. I think one of the challenges that certainly local authorities have had, I think, is is having to react to the kind of latest, version of the government support. So it was all the business grants and everything. I know that's all still ongoing. And then it's now moved sort of into the town centre space. Those things are all fine, but they're not actually the foundations of the economy. I mean, what you need in economies are ultimately, for it to be sustainable, is you have to have people with spending power, and basically the real foundation. If I take a place like Hampshire, we're fortunate. We're sort of on the edge of that London economy. We have some big corporate players, people like Zurich, people like IBM, etc. They are organisations which are in international markets and are very much part of that tradable definition that I mentioned before. So I do feel that, and there are other businesses as well, obviously smaller scale in the marine sector, which also trade internationally. Some of them, 90-something% of their output goes to export. Those are the businesses that are effectively bringing net wealth back into the UK. They're the real foundation in terms of the earning power in local economies. And actually, we do need to make sure our plans, however they might have to adapt, they need to be focused on those parts of the economy as well. Because in many ways, the high streets, the town centres, will ultimately only thrive, not because of how we've designed them and everything else, or what kind of outlets and activities there are there, but whether people have actually got money in the economy to spend. So I think you have to get the foundations right, as well as the, if you like, the immediately apparent issues.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And what I've got here, how can places ensure that they build on recent collaborations and move forward positively, rather than just fall back into self-interest and place competition? And Corrine, I know from what you said, some of the frustrations there are in decision making and actually really making a difference at this point. So what's your view on that one?
I think sometimes there's a lot of talk, isn't there, of collaboration and handing over and creating structures that allow a number of people to be involved in decision making and bring forward ideas. But ultimately, decision making seems to kind of go back to a central point locally, and it leaves a number of people frustrated. For me, I'm hoping that the recent times will mean and will accelerate, actually, let's just try it and let's try and do things differently. And what's the harm? So I coming back to kind of Martin's point about those symbols of reset, let's start doing some things. And it doesn't have to be the big pipeline infrastructure stuff and bringing the investment in. It starts with what's being asked locally for spaces for collaboration. So, is it an old supermarket that the creatives for some time have been wanting to access and create as a workspace? Is it a local gym that at the moment can't operate, so they want access to the playing field behind that's owned by the local authority? Can we do that? And I think if we can start saying yes and doing those collaboratively things together, it gives a confidence for everyone that actually, oh, that wasn't so bad and that works. And then that snowballs and leads to other things. It creates a culture and atmosphere that we work together, rather than going back to, like you say, those quite solo, kind of siloed situations where we make our decisions in our respective places and they're not really with the wider stakeholders of a place. So start small and then show by doing.
Okay. An interesting one on here, which a couple of you might have a view on. So what matters most, whether looking to recover or reset post-pandemic, is enough emphasis being attached to the importance of people, particularly in places where culture and tourism have been key drivers of growth and prosperity? I, for one, am really concerned about the role of culture, because it had kind of gone in the last 5 years from being not thought about to top of the tree, and it holds people and communities together. Maybe Martin and perhaps Tom give a view on that.
Thanks, John. Coventry was gifted hard-earned, I'd say deserved to get the UK City of Culture 2021. So we've invested significantly in culture in all of its forms for quite some time as we gear up. My view is, as a result of COVID and all of this discussion about emblems, symbols, connectivity, both virtually and physically, of bringing people together, healing rifts, going after deep structural inequalities which become wider, blah, 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 putting our place on a map, both nationally and internationally. That gift is now even more precious, actually. And I feel, as one colleague on this, I feel an even headier responsibility to set that as I said earlier on, an emblem, a symbol, matched into the Commonwealth Games in 2022 for our region and our city as something very special, very authentic. But the very reason that we wanted to accentuate culture and people and diversity and youthfulness now is even more important than it was pre-COVID. So we've got to find a way of arguing it. But how do you do that at the same time? And David said this, and others said, I said at the beginning, my character, I'm an economist, so I understand a little bit about the hard edge of infrastructure. How do you do all of this and at the same time understand that our revival and our economic renaissance, certainly in the West Midlands, can only come in addition to that amazing cultural renaissance, is through some hard wiring of our physical infrastructure, of our R&D, research and development assets, on getting our advanced manufacturing back up and running and embracing those green digital technology of the future. So it's not an either or, it's how you put a lens of that over the culture. But not many people have got the unbelievable opportunity, John, to be in the international eye for a number of years through this gift. It will feel different, but it will, for me, symbolize a very different, confident city, region, and hopefully country as well. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with the question and the intent that if we're not careful, we jettison, disinvest the very things that will be in the heart of connecting our people and our places together through what will be, significant hardship, turmoil, and continued grief, actually, and loss over the next few years.
Tom, you've got big cultural assets.
Very, very hard to disagree with all of Martin's points, really. I think I'd just add that, the importance of those attractions to the place narrative for, any town, any city can't be underestimated. And I think, as Martin said, and I think going back to David's point at the start, as well as they've both kind of implied in this, they're part of the DNA, but to get them functioning properly depends on probably two key things. One is getting the visitors back in and getting them able to feel confident, happy and safe in experiencing those things to not just the level they did pre-pandemic, but to the levels we want to stretch those things to. But secondly, let's not forget the connection between all of that and people's experience of the real economy, which is, if people are going to do that effectively, if they're going to come to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, if they're going to spend money eating in the new restaurant we've just developed there that's won thousands of prizes for the quality of its food and its architecture and its views and all the rest of it, they've got to be working, they've got to be earning, they've got to be able to pay for public transport to get there. And they've got to feel safe and able to function in that sense. And we've had this big challenge in Wakefield over many years with those attractions, that it's not that we're lacking international attractions, but we're lacking the ability to really mobilize those in local markets, in regional markets and in international markets combined. If you want local people to be part of the bedrock of enjoying and experiencing that, we've got to help them to progress and function and mobilize in the real economy and have that spending and earning power. That's what oils the wheels of everything on this. And I'll come back to my point that I made in my earlier remarks, that without an employment support strategy that looks at skills and progression across the whole age spectrum, we're on a hiding to nothing with achieving that. If we don't support adults to enable skills progression, employment progression, and therefore earnings progression, we're going to be a million miles away from achieving those goals. And I think that is a public service leadership responsibility, and it isn't just about the UK, it's an international dilemma we have to tackle properly.
I think, John, if I can just add to that, because I think it's really important to link to Corrine's point and some of David's earlier on, that what we've got to get used to in our places, and the we is all the we, not just those that have got lucky enough to have hierarchical power in big institutions like our own, but everybody, is more than ever before, as a result of what we've discussed over the last 40 odd minutes, it's going to be messier than ever before. It's going to be grayer, hazier, fuzzier than ever before. And I'll tell you what, if I hear one more person say that they're going to give me a project initiation document, which is going to prince to our way out of this, missing the whole point of how leadership and collaboration needs to be understood in this world that professionals will struggle with, as will politicians, because it won't be an easy route map out. It will be really quite messy. And actually, I find that quite energizing, because it gives a uniqueness and stops that point about a competition between places. And I'll shut up, but one final thing which I think is really important, which is Corrine's response to that first question. This is really important. During this crisis, just remember, let's say it how it is again. You've got some amazing collaborations being built in horrendous circumstances, which I think will be enduring. You've got others that appear on the surface to be incredibly strong because of the crisis, but they are bound by emergency powers and command and control structures. They will not always be in place. So we've got to work very hard as a place to understand when they dissipate and we go back to not having that command and control, how you build trust and bridges in the long term when it's going to be very messy.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, various bits about place leadership, and we've got some questions to do with that. And I know that in Hampshire, David, you're looking at place leadership as part of thinking about the place holistically. How do you see that leadership changing as a result of this then? And will it really change genuinely, or will we be just back to just a slightly different version of where we were before?
I suppose I'm in the school of thought, John, of somewhere in between the two, in the sense that I think there will be a shift. I think human nature being what it is, it might not always be as radical as might all hope it to be or anticipate it to be. I think first of all, for Hampshire, we're an interesting place because we're conservative both with big and small C's, which means we don't generally go for radical change. And I think the current circumstances have been probably a wake-up call that even these sort of traditionally prosperous parts of the south of England can no longer be complacent about their futures. And I think I've already mentioned about our dialogue with government. One of the roles that the south probably has to play in the medium term is to kind of refill some of those government coffers in terms of taxes and tax revenues, etc., because we're one of the parts of the country that is a net contributor to that. But I think I'm just quickly going to use a conversation I had yesterday with the new VC of new Vice Chancellor of Solent University, where actually what they're already planning is something they don't already have, which is a new business school, which is a really radical project in quite difficult times to plan something of that nature. But the beautiful opportunity associated with something like that, which I think links to the place leadership agenda, is how do we ensure that an asset like that, that's going to be completely new, can actually be completely integrated and aligned with our economic strengths, the specialities of that particular university, and where we want our economy to go, and the skills we need the people in our local economy to have. That's a fantastic reset opportunity. I think one of the challenges we do have, particularly in areas like skills, is you've got a lot of institutions that have been around for a long, long time. My question and my challenge is how adaptable they are. I think one of the things that devolution ought to bring is a much more localized ability to prioritize where spend on skills goes. I think we're too bound by national policies on skills, and I think that's where, for me, place leadership could have a really key role to play, is really challenging the status quo and making sure our education and skills provision is genuinely, and I mean genuinely, fit for purpose for our local economy, and of course for the people that live and work here as well.
Yeah, and certainly having the private sector full frontal in that place leadership can only help that discussion. One of the things that's come out quite a lot, and it's something that exercises me, is there's a lot of focus on urban centres, cities, town centres, and funding sort of put towards those. Where on earth does this leave the rural side of life? You know, a lot of our places have got, you know, rural economies, smaller places, relying on different things. And is recovery reset going to be different than in an urban context? And I'll let anybody take that one.
John, I think yes, it's going to be different. The key is how you mesh the opportunities for rural areas in. I mean, in a sense, a rural area has got its own attractions, it's got its own reasons for people to visit, but it's also got its own real people living there who've got to connect with a place narrative, got to connect with aspiration, and got to connect with employment opportunities that often won't be on the doorstep. I think the only other thing I'd say is a lot of the, you know, there's rural and there's rural. There's very nice, tiny, high market value housing areas in rural villages in Wakefield, but there are also rural areas that are actually quite big employers. And one of our biggest, most interesting, most innovative bits of the new economy is not in the city centre at all. It's down in the southwest. It's almost over the border in Barnsley, which is Production Park, and that's at the heart of digital entertainment, live industry, you know, production, lighting, sound engineering, and all the rest of it. They're producing events and concerts that are performing in Martin's Arena in Coventry every other day of the week. That is when it's functioning. And I think, you know, we've got to think about how do we build the infrastructure and the economy around those opportunities, because often, in much the same way as others have been highlighting, those are part of the hidden gem DNA of the place, and we don't shout and celebrate about them enough, and we don't put enough, I think, collective place leadership and energy behind promoting what those could offer and the opportunity they could represent in the new economy. And you know, I'm sure others have got other examples of that, but I think there's a lot more to rural than just kind of rural villages out in the middle of nowhere, if I can put it that way. And that's key to the economics of this.
Martin, you were.
So I'll be quick, because, you know, I say this as somebody that's unashamedly passionate about cities. I sit on the City Centre for Cities board, and I represent a city that's very bounded, has some beautiful parts on its city limits, but is in effect a very dense urban area. But the argument here is, surely, certainly with the IED supporting this discussion, and a number of people on the call are in an economic development role, let's again just be really, really clear. The future of traditional, but also futured economic success will be driven in output terms by the continued success of all of our cities and our urban areas. That is just the truth. But the other bit of the truth is that what has happened over the last 12 weeks has completely, in my view, reframed economic geographies, productivity, where people work from, where they see things happening in terms of supply chains. So this is the third point. This is a really critical bit, is why do we continue to have a sense of having almost antagonistic conversations between rural places and areas and urban? Surely the trick here is Coventry is as powerful as it is because of the amazing asset base that sits around it in Warwickshire and Solihull, for example, which have urban areas, but also some beautiful rural assets, and also challenges of isolation, lack of public transport connectivity. So my point here is, say it how it is, because the economic evidence will remain clear about output and about the hubs of our urban centres. But let's start connecting all of those assets and place layer it in a way which respects and understands the difference. Not one's good, one's bad. And I remind everyone, it wasn't that long ago that world kind of expectations and modelling was to suggest a mass deurbanisation and a sense of actually people won't be flocking to cities. The opposite happened. So we know there's these mega trends happening. But I'm gifted again by the fact that on my patch across the West Midlands, we have amazing rural assets, some amazing cities, and the connection and understanding of those together is what's going to be the future in my view.
Yeah, Corrine, yeah.
We're kind of talking about measures there and talking about urban and rural. I think for me, it's that measure of well-being, the measure of social value added. And what we've really seen, and I think this links to the place conversation is that people have found this value in being together as a community, be it working from home or if they've been furloughed, but we've found the pleasure in those assets. We're not spending money visiting those assets. And yet that kind of the contribution that that makes to our personal resilience during this very stressful time and going forward is really significant. So I think for me, what I've really taken is that we mustn't undermine the investment in the place that might not create a measure of GVA, but it'll be a social value added measure. And then if we have that resilience, it contributes to our mental well-being. It means we might feel inclined, in Newhaven, we have this poverty of aspiration. Maybe if I feel better, then I might be inclined to take that skills offer. I might be inclined to take that role again. And then I will become someone who can contribute to my economy once again. So I think we mustn't lose sight of the social value added. And I think COVID has shown that beautifully, what we get from our places and how that contributes to kind of wider resilience and so on.
No, really good point. So there's a point here about most places know what they need and what they'd like to see is change and engage better with communities, but feel it's all about delivery and facilitating private investment. How can the public sector in this changing world better ensure delivery of the changes that they want to see?
Can I just pretend?
Yeah.
Some of us, what I would like to see is a change in process, and that's what I meant earlier about doing things differently. That perhaps if we have a site for development that a number of community-based organisations might be interested in to deliver that story, that shared future, let's create a structure and process that doesn't automatically eliminate CICs coming together, social enterprise and so on, and have, for example, criterias for or design competitions for those uses. So that would be one such way. I think, let's change the way in which we allow people to engage in the decision making for what it's going to be used for, what it's going to look like, who's going to operate it. So that takes time and a bit of patience sometimes, rather than just dismissing and going for the kind of usual suspects.
Okay, we're nearly out of time, I'm afraid. So can I ask each of you then, very, very pithily, one hope out of all this of change? Tom.
Proper functioning system of skills and employment support that enables labour market progression properly and doesn't just distract us with devolution of single budgets that won't solve the problem in terms of labour market progression.
David?
It would just be, my plea would be for local authorities not to use lack of finance as a reason for lack of ambition. I think there's lots of things we can do that are non-monetary to instill more confidence in the private sector to invest in our places, and we should focus on where we can utilise our influence in that avenue, not just always scratching around and pleading for more money from government or wherever. Because I know at the moment one of the challenges and the risk is that some local authorities will go very inward looking because they're dealing with that financial situation.
Yeah. Corrine?
To seize the opportunities that are going to come our way through the change in mindset and try to do things differently.
Martin?
My hope, John and colleagues, is that when we ask the question, which we should always do, whose reset and whose place story is it anyway, that the answer doesn't reflect back, as it always has done, through a middle class, professional and political lens, because that will miss the very disruption that I have to tell you is as important as an acute in some of those areas we've heard from Corrine and David, as it is in some really, dense urban and, quite edgy areas in the West Midlands and in the North. So that would be my hope. Sometimes I wake up and feel very positive about that. Other times I feel like we're further away from that than ever before. But let's be hopeful, because that's what Thinking Place is all about.
Okay, guys, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. The hour has gone. It's raced by. Big thank you to the panelists who have given us such a lot to think about. I knew they would. To IED, our co-hosts, to thank my team for doing all the work behind the scenes. The recording will be made available. We'll have a major point summary on the website. The interest and demand means we're going to be back with number 2 of the box set in the next couple of weeks. We'll make you aware of what that is. If there's any aspects that you'd like to follow up more directly, please send us an email. Thank you all as the audience for taking part, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, John.